There comes a moment on the path that no book announces with fireworks, no teacher frames with applause, and no vision crowns with light. It arrives without ceremony, like dusk slipping into a room while you were busy staring at the window. This is the silent phase of enlightenment, the part no one warns the chosen about, because it cannot be sold, summarized, or celebrated in the ways awakening is supposed to be. If you have ever felt as though the world went quiet just as you expected it to finally speak to you, you are already standing at its threshold. Stay with me until the end of this exploration, because what unfolds here may reframe what you thought enlightenment was meant to feel like. And if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, now is the moment to do so. Not for content, but for continuity, because what we are unraveling is not a single idea, but a living current. Most stories of awakening begin with ignition, a sudden insight, a revelation, a collapse of illusions so dramatic it feels like a rebirth. But those stories often end too soon. They leave out what happens after the light turns on and before the new world stabilizes. They skip the long, quiet corridor where nothing seems to happen, where the old self has dissolved, but the new one has not yet learned how to breathe. This corridor is not empty. It is full of echoes. Yet, to the unprepared mind, it feels like abandonment. The silent phase is the interval where the universe steps back, not because it has rejected you, but because it is no longer shouting at someone who has learned to listen. In this phase, the signs diminish. Synchronicities soften. The emotional highs that once felt like confirmation fade into a neutral stillness. People who once mirrored your awakening drift away or become strangely distant. Even your own inner dialogue changes tone, becoming less dramatic, less urgent, almost flat. Many mistake this for failure or regression. They believe they have lost the thread, fallen out of favor with fate, or somehow missed it. But the silent phase is not a punishment. It is recalibration. It is the moment when the universe removes the training wheels and watches to see if you can stand without constant feedback. Think of a seed buried deep in the earth. Before it breaks the surface, there is a long season where nothing appears to move. Above ground, the soil looks lifeless. Below, however, the seed is splitting itself open. The structures that once defined it are being dismantled so that something entirely different can emerge. If you dig it up during this phase, convinced nothing is happening, you kill the process. The silent phase of enlightenment works the same way. It is invisible growth. It is the undoing that must occur before becoming can take root. Those who are chosen, by circumstance, by calling, or by an unexplainable pull toward truth, often expect their path to feel increasingly illuminated. Instead, they encounter a strange dimming. Not darkness, but absence. A vast neutrality where old meanings no longer satisfy and new meanings have not yet arrived. This is where many turn back. They try to resurrect their former identities, reattach to old roles, old desires, old noise, just to feel something familiar again. But familiarity is not truth, and the silent phase demands a courage that ecstasy never required. The courage to remain present without reassurance. There is a reason no one warns you about this stage. Language fails here. How do you explain a season where progress feels like standing still, where clarity feels like emptiness, where faith is no longer emotional but structural? How do you tell someone that enlightenment does not always feel like light, but sometimes like standing alone in a vast, quiet field, unsure whether you are lost or finally free? This phase strips away spiritual glamour. It removes the identity of seeker, the thrill of discovery, and the comfort of being special because you are awakening. What remains is something far more unsettling and far more powerful: naked awareness without applause. In the silent phase, the world tests whether your awakening was dependent on stimulation or rooted in truth. When the signs stop, do you still trust the path? When no one mirrors your depth, do you still honor it? When the universe no longer whispers encouragement, do you still walk forward? This is not about belief. It is about embodiment. Enlightenment, at this stage, is no longer something you experience. It is something you become. And becoming is quiet work. Many feel isolated here, not because they are alone, but because they are no longer synchronized with the noise of the collective. Conversations feel hollow. Goals that once motivated you now seem strangely irrelevant. Even suffering changes texture. It is less dramatic, more existential. You are no longer fighting shadows. You are learning how to stand in open space. This is where chosen ones often think something has gone wrong. In truth, something has finally gone right. The dependency on external validation, spiritual or otherwise, is being dismantled. The silent phase is where the soul learns to generate its own gravity. Before this, meaning was pulled from outside experiences, teachings, relationships, or signs. Now, meaning begins to arise from within, unannounced and unforced. This is unsettling because it removes reference points. You can no longer measure your growth by intensity or frequency of experiences. You must learn a subtler metric: stability, presence, the ability to remain open without needing confirmation that openness is working. Cosmically speaking, this phase mirrors the space between stars. Vast, dark, seemingly empty, yet essential. Without that space, light would have no contrast, no direction, no depth. In the same way, the silent phase gives shape to consciousness. It creates the internal architecture that can hold higher awareness without collapsing under its weight. This is why so many awakenings fracture. The light arrives before the structure is ready. Silence builds the structure. If you are here now, feeling unmoored, uncelebrated, or strangely neutral after profound realizations, this message is not here to excite you. It is here to steady you. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are being entrusted with something deeper than experience, integration. The universe has not gone quiet because it has left you. It has gone quiet because you are being invited to listen at a level where words are no longer necessary. This introduction is only the doorway. Beyond it lie the core themes that explain why silence is not the absence of enlightenment, but its refinement. We will move through the hidden mechanics of this phase, the illusions it dissolves, and the truths it quietly installs. But first, pause with this knowing. If everything feels quiet, you may not be lost. You may be exactly where the chosen are meant to learn how to stand without noise. As the path unfolds beyond the threshold of silence, certain themes begin to reveal themselves. Not loudly, not urgently, but the way mountains reveal their shape when fog thins. The silent phase of enlightenment is governed by principles that feel counterintuitive to everything the seeker was taught to expect. It is not additive, but subtractive. It does not elevate identity, it erodes it. And it does not reward effort with sensation, but with a steadiness so subtle it can be mistaken for emptiness. To understand this phase is to accept that awakening is not a ladder upward, but a deepening inward, where what matters most is no longer visible on the surface of experience. One of the first core themes that emerges in this quiet terrain is the collapse of spiritual contrast. Earlier stages of awakening thrive on polarity: light versus dark, asleep versus awake, ego versus truth. These contrasts are useful scaffolding, but they are not permanent architecture. In the silent phase, these distinctions begin to blur. You no longer feel dramatically above or beyond the world, nor trapped within it. Instead, you sense an unsettling equality between states. Joy and sorrow lose their sharp edges. Success and failure no longer define you. This is not apathy, it is equilibrium. Consciousness is learning how to exist without leaning against extremes. Another theme woven deeply into this phase is the dissolution of narrative. The mind has always relied on story to orient itself. Stories about who you are, where you're going, and why this all matters. Awakening initially provides a powerful new narrative. The seeker becomes the one who sees, the chosen one who understands. But silence dismantles even this refined storyline. You may notice that your internal commentary thins out. The urge to explain yourself, to justify your path, or to frame your experiences in grand meaning weakens. This can feel like losing direction, but what is actually happening is that consciousness is stepping out of narration mode and into direct presence. Life is no longer something you are constantly telling yourself about. It is simply happening. Illusion versus truth takes on a new form here. In earlier stages, illusion is something to be exposed, shattered, or transcended. In the silent phase, illusion loses its enemy status. You see it clearly, but you no longer feel compelled to fight it. Social masks, personal roles, even the ego itself are recognized as functional tools rather than villains. This understanding brings an unexpected compassion, not only for others still caught in illusions, but for the parts of yourself that once needed them. Truth, in this stage, is not aggressive. It does not seek to conquer illusion. It simply renders it unnecessary. Time also behaves differently in this quiet stretch. Urgency dissolves. The hunger to get somewhere spiritually fades, replaced by a strange patience that does not feel like waiting. You may notice that future-oriented thinking loses its grip. Goals feel abstract, even irrelevant. This can be frightening in a world structured around progress and achievement. But the silent phase reveals a deeper truth. When identity is no longer tied to becoming someone, time loosens its authority. You are no longer rushing toward completion because you are no longer defined by incompleteness. A particularly difficult concept to integrate is the loss of emotional confirmation. Earlier awakenings often come with intense feelings: love, bliss, awe, even righteous anger at illusion. Silence removes this feedback loop. You may still feel emotions, but they no longer signal spiritual alignment or misalignment. There is no internal fireworks display to reassure you that you are on the right path. This is deliberate. Enlightenment at this depth cannot depend on sensation, because sensations fluctuate. What is being cultivated instead is an unshakable clarity that does not rise or fall with mood. Another essential theme is the recalibration of identity from knower to witness. The chosen often feel called to understand, decode, interpret, and explain reality. Silence gently removes this compulsion. You may find yourself less interested in convincing others, less eager to articulate your insights, less attached to being seen as wise or awake. This is not withdrawal. It is maturation. Awareness is no longer trying to prove itself. It is resting in itself. The witness does not need an audience. Underlying all of these themes is a profound restructuring of trust. In the absence of signs, teachings, and emotional highs, you are asked to trust something far quieter, your own grounded presence. This trust is not belief-based, it is somatic. It lives in the nervous system, in the breath, in the ability to remain open even when nothing dramatic is happening. Many fail here because they confuse trust with certainty. But the silent phase teaches a subtler lesson. Certainty is not required. Stability is. Cosmically, this phase mirrors the moments between expansions. Just as the universe undergoes periods of rapid inflation followed by long stretches of apparent stillness, consciousness, too, must stabilize after revelation. Without this stabilization, expansion becomes fragmentation. The silent phase is where awareness learns coherence. It is where insight becomes integrated rather than overwhelming. Perhaps the most misunderstood concept of all is that silence does not mean disengagement from the world. On the contrary, it prepares you for a deeper, more grounded participation. But before that can happen, the need to perform awakening must dissolve. The chosen are often burdened by an unconscious sense of mission before they are ready to carry it. Silence removes the costume, the title, the urgency, leaving only the raw material of being. From this, something far more authentic can eventually emerge. These core themes do not announce themselves clearly. They seep in slowly, often disguised as boredom, confusion, or disillusionment. But beneath these surface impressions, a profound reordering is taking place. The architecture of consciousness is being reinforced, simplified, and strengthened. Nothing flashy survives here. Only what is real. As we move forward, these abstract concepts will find expression through deeper symbolic narratives, stories that reveal what logic cannot fully hold, and metaphors that mirror this silent transformation in lived form. There are truths that refuse to be held by explanation alone. They slip through definitions and flatten themselves when pressed into doctrine. For these truths, the universe has always relied on story, not as entertainment, but as transmission. In the silent phase of enlightenment, symbolic narratives begin to surface not because the mind seeks them, but because the soul recognizes itself within them. These stories do not instruct, they resonate. They are mirrors held at angles logic cannot reach. Imagine a watchman stationed at the edge of a vast desert, tasked with lighting signal fires whenever travelers approach. For years, the fires burn often. Caravans arrive, messages are exchanged, purpose feels clear. Then one day, the travelers stop coming, the horizon remains empty. The watchman lights fires out of habit at first, then with desperation, then finally not at all. The silence stretches. Days turn into seasons. The watchman begins to question his worth, his role, his very existence. But what he does not yet see is that the desert itself is changing. Beneath the sands, trade routes are being rerouted. The watchman's tower is no longer needed as a signal post. It is becoming something else, an anchor point, a landmark, a place of orientation rather than announcement. His role did not end. It transformed. The silence was not neglect, it was reassignment. So it is with the chosen during this phase. The role of seeker, messenger, or interpreter quietly dissolves. You are no longer meant to signal constantly, to react, to translate meaning for every passing moment. Instead, you are becoming a fixed point of presence, someone whose stability speaks louder than any proclamation. This shift feels like loss only because it cannot be measured by activity. Another story surfaces, older and deeper. A river once prided itself on its movement. It roared through mountains, carved valleys, announced itself with sound and force. Villages grew to rely on its energy, its visibility. But as the river approached the sea, its current slowed. It widened. Its voice softened. To those upstream, it seemed as though the river was dying. In truth, it was preparing to become something larger than motion. At the shoreline, the river did not vanish, it merged. Its identity as river dissolved, but its essence continued as ocean. The silence at the mouth was not an ending. It was expansion beyond form. The silent phase carries this same paradox. What feels like diminishment is often diffusion into something more vast. The ego interprets this as loss because it measures existence through distinctness. But consciousness, when it matures, no longer needs sharp edges to know itself. It is content to be broad, quiet, and deep. There's also the myth of the bell that rang only once. In an ancient city, a bell was said to awaken all who heard it. When it rang, people experienced visions, clarity, and sudden insight. The city waited eagerly for its sound. One day, the bell rang, and never again. Generations later, people mourned the silence, believing the city had fallen out of grace. But those who studied the bell's construction discovered something else. The bell was never meant to ring repeatedly. Its purpose was to recalibrate hearing itself. Once ears were tuned, the world became audible in new ways. The silence was not absence, it was integration. Enlightenment works the same way. Initial awakenings ring loudly. They shake perception, disrupt habits, and announce transformation. But once perception has been retuned, the world itself becomes the teaching. Wind through leaves, breath in the body. The unremarkable moments between events. Silence is not the end of communication. It is the beginning of a more refined language. A more intimate story unfolds in the life of a potter. For years, the potter shapes clay with visible effort, hands pressing, turning, correcting. The apprentice watches closely, mimicking every movement. But one day, the potter stops instructing. He sits quietly, watching the apprentice work. The apprentice grows anxious, believing he has been abandoned. Yet, it is in this quiet observation that the apprentice's true skill emerges. Without constant correction, intuition awakens. The potter's silence is not neglect, it is trust. In the silent phase, the universe becomes that quiet potter. Guidance shifts from external prompting to internal resonance. You are trusted now to sense alignment without instruction. This trust can feel like being left alone in the workshop, but it is the highest form of initiation. Symbolically, this phase often appears in dreams and myths as the wilderness or the desert. Not a place of punishment, but of stripping. In the wilderness, distractions fall away. Social roles dissolve. The chosen confront not demons, but emptiness. And it is in that emptiness that something essential is remembered. The wilderness does not give answers. It removes the noise that made answers necessary. Perhaps the most poignant narrative is the story of the lamp that no longer needed oil. Once, the lamp burned brightly, fueled by constant refilling. People gathered around it for warmth and light. But over time, the lamp's flame stabilized. It no longer flickered. It no longer consumed oil at the same rate. Eventually, it appeared unlit. Yet the room remained illuminated. The light had shifted from visible flame to ambient presence. Those who judged by appearance thought the lamp was broken. Those who felt the warmth understood it had become something subtler and more enduring. These symbolic stories are not meant to romanticize the silent phase. They exist to normalize it. To remind you that this quiet, ambiguous territory has always been part of the journey, even if modern narratives ignore it. Every myth worth remembering contains a long middle passage where nothing obvious happens, where the hero is neither rising nor falling, but being reshaped. If you find yourself in this chapter of your own story, let these narratives sit with you. You do not need to interpret them. You only need to notice where they resonate. That resonance is recognition. And recognition, in this phase, is enough. The greatest misunderstanding about the silent phase of enlightenment is that it is removed from daily life, as though silence were something that only happens in monasteries, forests, or long nights of introspection. In reality, this phase is most intensely lived in the ordinary. It is woven into conversations, work, relationships, choices, and the quiet moments when no one is watching. The silent phase is not an escape from the world. It is a deeper immersion into it, stripped of the need for constant meaning-making. One of the first real-world implications is how you move through environments that once energized or disturbed you. Places that used to overwhelm you may now feel oddly neutral. Situations that once triggered strong emotional reactions may still arise, but they no longer hook into you the same way. This does not mean you have become detached or indifferent. It means your nervous system is no longer governed by the same reflexive loops. Silence has settled into your responses. You pause more, you listen longer. You act less from urgency and more from clarity that arrives without drama. In work and creative expression, the silent phase often feels like a plateau. Inspiration may not strike with lightning intensity. The drive to produce, prove, or impress weakens. Many misinterpret this as stagnation or burnout. But what is actually happening is a recalibration of motivation. You're being asked to create not from identity, not from recognition, not from spiritual purpose narratives, but from grounded presence. This is uncomfortable in a world that rewards visible momentum. Yet this phase teaches a crucial skill: the ability to continue showing up without needing affirmation that what you are doing is significant. Relationships also undergo a quiet but profound shift. You may notice that some connections naturally fall away, not through conflict but through misalignment. Conversations feel repetitive. Emotional dynamics that once felt intense now feel unnecessary. This can bring a sense of loneliness, but it is a different loneliness than before. It is not the ache of being unseen. It is the spaciousness of no longer needing to be mirrored constantly. At the same time, new relationships, often fewer, often quieter, begin to form around shared presence rather than shared identity. These connections may not be dramatic, but they are steady. They do not drain you. They do not require performance. Decision-making changes as well. In earlier phases, you may have relied on signs, intuition spikes, or emotional certainty to guide choices. In silence, decisions emerge from something subtler. There is less internal debate, less analysis, less narrative justification. You simply know when something is aligned, even if you cannot explain why. This knowing is calm, almost boring, which makes it easy to doubt. But over time you notice its accuracy. Silence sharpens discernment not by adding information, but by removing interference. A particularly challenging implication appears when others project expectations onto you. Because you carry a quiet steadiness, people may assume you have answers, certainty, or direction they lack. Yet internally, you may feel more unassuming than ever. The silent phase teaches you how to hold space without rescuing, to listen without fixing, to be present without absorbing others' chaos. This is not withdrawal. It is boundary as wisdom. You learn that being available does not mean being responsible for others' awakenings. Emotionally, life continues to offer grief, joy, frustration, and love. But these experiences move through you differently. They do not define you. You feel them fully, yet they do not crystallize into identity. Pain no longer demands a story about why it is happening. Joy no longer demands that you hold on to it. This fluidity can feel strange, even disorienting, because the emotional highs and lows that once made life feel vivid have softened. But in their place is a deeper, more sustainable aliveness. You are not constantly reacting to life. You are participating in it. The silent phase also reshapes your relationship with purpose. Grand missions and cosmic roles lose their grip. Purpose becomes less about what you are meant to do and more about how you are meant to be. This does not make life smaller. It makes it more precise. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to embody clarity, integrity, and presence. You realize that transformation does not require proclamation. It happens quietly, through consistency. On a practical level, routines often simplify. You may feel drawn to fewer practices, fewer teachings, fewer inputs. Meditation may become less formal and more continuous, woven into daily awareness. Spiritual consumption decreases because you are no longer hungry for insight in the same way. This can feel like losing interest, but it is actually a sign of digestion. You are assimilating what you have already learned. Perhaps the most important real-world integration is learning to trust this phase enough not to escape it. Modern culture is uncomfortable with stillness. It equates silence with stagnation and visibility with value. The silent phase asks you to resist this pressure. to let your life look unremarkable while something essential stabilizes beneath the surface. This requires a kind of quiet courage, the courage to let others misunderstand your stillness, the courage to not rush toward the next identity. In this way, the silent phase becomes a training ground for grounded freedom. You are learning how to live without constant internal commentary, without spiritual spectacle, without needing life to prove its meaning to you. This is not the end of the journey. It is the preparation for a deeper return, one where action, when it arises, comes from clarity rather than compulsion. The world does not need more noise. It needs people who can move through it without being consumed by it. This phase is shaping you for that role, even if it feels like nothing is happening. At the end of all seeking, there is not a proclamation but a settling, not a throne but a ground. The silent phase of enlightenment is the place where the journey stops trying to impress you and instead asks you to inhabit yourself fully. It is here, in this uncelebrated terrain, that the chosen discover what all the earlier fire was for. Not to make you glow endlessly, but to burn away what could not survive stillness. When you look back across the arc of this exploration, from the first quiet disorientation to the dismantling of identity, from the symbolic stories whispered by silence to the lived reality of grounded presence, you may notice a single thread weaving through it all. Enlightenment was never meant to be loud forever. Noise is how consciousness breaks open. Silence is how it stabilizes. Without this phase, awakening remains fragile, dependent on stimulation, vulnerable to collapse the moment life stops cooperating. The silent phase is where truth learns how to walk. Before this, insight floats above life, commenting on it, interpreting it, occasionally judging it. Now, insight sinks into the bones. It shows up in how you speak when you could dominate but choose restraint, in how you listen without waiting to respond, in how you move through uncertainty without demanding reassurance. This is not passivity, it is embodied authority, the kind that does not announce itself because it no longer needs permission to exist. Many who reach this stage quietly grieve the loss of their former intensity. They miss the signs, the synchronicities, the sense of being carried by something visibly larger than themselves. What they do not yet realize is that they are no longer being carried because they have become capable of carrying. The universe has not withdrawn its support. It has internalized it within you. What once arrived as external guidance now lives as internal coherence. This is why the silent phase often feels lonely even when you are not alone. You are no longer moving in step with collective rhythms. Your pace has changed. Your attention has changed. You are not rejecting the world, but you are no longer hypnotized by it. This creates a gap, a quiet space where old forms of belonging no longer fit, and new ones have not yet formed. This gap is not meant to be rushed. It is the womb of a different way of relating, one rooted in presence rather than performance. The transformation here is subtle but irreversible. Once you have learned how to remain grounded without constant affirmation, you cannot unlearn it. Once you have experienced meaning without narrative, you cannot fully return to living inside stories alone. Once you have stood in silence and discovered it is not empty, you carry that knowing into every sound that follows. This is the gift of the silent phase. It does not give you more experiences, it gives you yourself. The call, then, is not to escape this phase but to honor it, to stop interpreting quiet as failure, to stop searching for the next spiritual peak as proof that you are still evolving. Growth at this level is not vertical, it is integrative. It weaves insight into action, awareness into character, stillness into movement. It prepares you for a different kind of contribution, one that does not depend on recognition, but on resonance. You may not yet see what emerges after silence. Often the next phase only becomes visible in hindsight. Action returns, but it is cleaner. Purpose returns, but it is quieter. Service returns, but it is no longer fueled by identity. When you move, you do so without needing the world to validate that movement. When you speak, you do so without needing to convince. When you act, you do so without attachment to outcome. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with it. If there is a single transformation this phase asks of you, it is this: to trust who you are becoming even when there is no evidence yet. To allow your life to look ordinary while your inner architecture reorganizes itself around truth. To let silence do its work without interrupting it with doubt. This trust is not blind. It is earned through presence, through the quiet recognition that something essential feels settled, even if nothing spectacular is happening. The chosen are not marked by constant revelation. They are marked by the capacity to remain clear in the absence of noise, to hold depth without drama, to walk through the world without needing to announce that they see through it. If you have reached this point, you are not unfinished. You are unburdened. So let the silence remain. Let it teach you how to listen beyond sound. Let it refine you beyond identity. Let it prepare you for whatever comes next, not as a seeker waiting for permission, but as a presence already at home in itself. When the world speaks again, you will hear it differently, and when you respond, you will do so not from urgency, but from truth that no longer needs to shout. This is the silent phase of enlightenment no one warned you about. Not because it is rare, but because it cannot be explained to those who have not yet stood within it. If you are here now, know this: nothing has gone wrong. Something has finally become real,